Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of the Mikey on Mute podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mikey on Mute, coming off mute to really break that stigma and have those tough conversations with you. We're calling episode 2, Learning to Walk on Eggshells. Now, last episode, and again, thank you for everyone that listened to episode 1, that reached out, had encouraging words. It means the world to me that you gave it a shot, that you gave it a listen, and I really hope that this story helps somebody down the road. But last episode, I ended on the topic of how I am reacting versus responding. Now, I think it's time to get a glimpse into why that is. Again, this is my personal story. It may resonate with you, it may not. And please remember that there are 3 sides to every story. My side, their side, and the truth. I was really lost trying to process the effects and consequences of being taught that toxic masculinity from family. We touched a lot on that toxic masculinity last episode. So when I was trying to understand and figure out what I was supposed to do with it, how to go about it, and what was wrong with me, I knew I had to get something out. I had to talk to somebody. And so I became vulnerable with the one person who, at the time at least, I thought I could trust. This is going to be a quick glimpse in. There's going to be some, very overview here, so I won't go into super big details about the timeline, but I met my ex-wife in late 2010. We had our son in November of 2011, and we married in late 2013. This was one of those moments that you look at about grabbing those brass rings in life. I thought how I should be married since we already did things in the wrong order according to society and my family, what I was taught in culture and everything like that. So those should statements came out very loud again. I should be married. That kind of pushed me to the proposal. We got married. Everything kind of caught up to that point. Again, this is a very brief, kind of just vague overview, but my ex-wife, she definitely gained my trust. Unfortunately, it was using a mix of love bombing, rewriting history to make me believe that she was on my side, and pretending to be an empath that got me to trust her. I was super vulnerable, spilling to her everything about how I felt like I didn't live up to things, how I didn't know what it means to be a man, and how I was feeling like I don't know if I know how to do that. I don't know if I was taught that, and I think that I'm failing that. One of the things that constantly came up in my talks with being vulnerable with her was I told her I didn't feel like I was meeting the standards of being a husband and being a father. These standards, again, were ones that were given to me by society, given to me by my surroundings, and all I knew from that point was I'm not reaching them. I'm a failure. This is how my mind is working. And while I'm spilling all of this to her and being vulnerable, I thought I was going to get something in return that would give me an answer, that would comfort me somehow. However, my ex-wife kind of did the opposite of that. She would devalue me even further, agreeing to my flaws, and using my words to reinforce that negative self-talk. She was quoting me. Basically anything that I said I was worried about not achieving, she would just reiterate, "You're right, you're not doing that, you're not doing it well enough, you're not meeting it at all, whatever it may be. Any negative image I had of myself, I was being given more evidence that it was true by my ex-wife. She would micro-abandon by constantly threatening to leave. She would tell me, if you can't be a man enough, if you can't make enough money, I'm going to leave and I'm going to take our son with us. I had this constant worry that she was going to take off because she told me she was going to. And then she would turn around and go in the opposite direction. Suddenly I'd get extra affection. The things that I told her I needed from the beginning of the relationship, I got extra of. So I got physical touch, I got words of affirmation. It was very strange because this was coming from the person that had just devalued me a little bit ago, and suddenly I'm getting words of affirmation back that go against that. I didn't know how to take it, but I knew that I desperately wanted those words of affirmation. I wanted her to tell me how I was doing a good job, how I was going to be a good father, and I was going to be a good husband, that there were just steps I had to take. That although I may be struggling right now, perhaps there's a chance down the road that I can make it up. And so I would try harder. I would continue to do things that made me feel like hopefully I could gain that status again. I worked a lot of overtime, put in as many hours as I could. I wanted to be able to bring home that big paycheck and show her, look, I am the provider. However, once I started working all that overtime, she told me that I was not taking into account the time that I needed to spend with her and the family, and that I was not being a good husband and was not being a good father. So here I had been pumping hours and hours of overtime out to try to prove to her something that it was never going to change anyway. It didn't matter what I did or did not do. She had the perfect balance of devaluing and then supporting and devaluing and just knowing how to build me up and yet how to pull that rug out from under me. Narcissists, like my ex-wife, try to get an emotional response or reaction from others because they truly thrive on feeling like they are above others, that they have that control. Getting an emotional response gives that person a feeling of, I did that, I caused them to feel that way. And suddenly they are back in control and they know what they're doing. And it gives them this fuel, this fire. They want attention and will do things to get you to react with emotions versus logic. One thing I struggle with to this day, I talk a lot about how logically I can see what I did wrong. I can break down the thoughts that are in my head. When I'm in therapy every week, there's at least one time each session where I'm like, logically, I know this, but, I'm not thinking logically when these thoughts happen, when the anxiety happens. It's the emotion brain. And that's from these years and years of dealing with a narcissist who wanted me to react with emotions. It gave her a sense of control. If I wasn't thinking logically, she could manipulate me. She could use that against me. If I wasn't thinking logically, I had no solid evidence to prove her wrong. And so whatever she said, I just had to trust it because I wasn't thinking logically. And she knew exactly what to say and what to do and when to do it to get me to buy into whatever it was. Narcissists use things like baiting, using your triggers and vulnerabilities to provoke emotional responses. These are typically people that are close to you that know you really well. They know how to push your buttons, as the old saying goes. They know that if they say something in a certain way, or perhaps it's a certain phrase or word or tone of voice, maybe they say it differently, they know that it gets that emotional response out of you, and so they start using that. They use baiting to get you going, even in an everyday conversation. You see this with narcissists in your life that will be almost passive aggressive with you, but using those phrases and trigger words to really still get that emotional response, and then act like you're the one that did something wrong because you got upset. They were just talking normally. They also use gaslighting to try to convince you that your feelings are untrue or invalid. Gaslighting is a phrase that has really come to light in the last couple of years, especially when it comes to narcissism and how that can show in those that are dealing with mental illness. Gaslighting really can be as simple as you are explaining how you are feeling. You're trying to use those words to explain those. You hear like I statements, like I am feeling this way. You think you're doing the right thing and you're using these statements, and after you've emptied your mind about how you're feeling and trying to have this conversation, they tell you basically like a schoolyard bully, nuh-uh, that's not true. You're wrong. You took it the wrong way. Any way to make you feel like the feelings and emotions you have are not true, they're not valid, and it takes away any credibility of what you were trying to say when you're trying to set that boundary, when you're trying to stand up for yourself. Narcissists will use a lot of belittling comments or taunting. Sometimes you see this verbal abuse and emotional abuse come out as actually calling somebody names. And it may not be like a giant slur or anything like that, but how many times have you heard from somebody in your life, oh, you're just being crazy, you're being dumb, you're being stupid, you're not acting right. They have these belittling comments that on paper to them don't seem like that big of a deal, but to you, they're words that continue to make you second guess yourself. Am I really being dumb? Did I say something stupid? Once you start to second guess yourself, they take notice of that, and that cycle starts all over again. So how did I learn to deal with narcissism when it came to my ex-wife? I'd love to say that I had some breakthrough light bulb moment and understood how to set a boundary and everything went great. We don't live in a fantasy world. That's not what happened. But I do want to share how I dealt with it, even if it wasn't the quote-unquote right way to go about things. I still want to be honest and share my story with you guys. I learned a very valuable lesson, and that's how to shut down. I knew that being vulnerable equaled not feeling well, not feeling heard. It actually would bring out derogatory comments, devaluing comments. I would feel these things from that support system that I thought was there. So my solution was, don't be vulnerable. Don't share things. If they're bothering you, just go quiet. Which brings us back to the name of the podcast, Mikey on Mute. I decided to go mute because for me it was safer than dealing with my feelings around her. The second lesson I learned was how to walk on eggshells. This phrase gets used a lot. You'll hear it in media, in therapy, in stories with your friends and coworkers and family. But basically, if I could avoid doing things or putting myself in a position that would upset her, then maybe I could avoid that conflict. Think of it as you are trying to walk through a house. A lot of us are parents here, and there are toys everywhere. You're trying to not set off that toy that's going to go loud. The baby is sleeping or something like that, and you are just trying not to cause a scene not be heard. This is the actions I took and the approach I took with my ex-wife. Because if I didn't do the things that I thought would upset her, I could avoid conflict. If I stayed silent, I could avoid being called names. At least I thought. Tried working that overtime. Tried working to spend extra money to get her whatever she wanted. I had those overtime hours in, so now I could use them to try to get her the things that she valued. I agreed to whatever she said. I know there's that old saying about happy wife, happy life. I took it as more of an obedience statement at that point. I thought you had to do whatever. That's just how marriage worked in my head. I was taught that's how it worked. So I was doing these things. I was learning to be invisible where I could. I was working extra time and spending more money and doing what I could to avoid conflict. Unfortunately for me, she just found other things to be upset about. No matter how much I avoided it, suddenly, as I said before, working overtime turned into not spending enough time with her. If I didn't share my feelings, then I was not being a good husband because I was not opening up. If I wasn't opening up, that means I didn't trust her. And how could this marriage work if I didn't trust her? Should she just leave because I'm not being vulnerable? No matter what I did, no matter how many eggshells I tried to avoid stepping on, how many landmines I tried to avoid setting off, it didn't seem to matter. They always came back with a vengeance, usually. My money became fuel to feed an addiction for my ex-wife. Gambling is something that got her out of her head in a way. It was a very unhealthy coping mechanism, something that gave her a sense of thrill, a sense of control in a way, which to me is weird. I've never been a gambling person. I don't like gambling. I'm not good at it. I don't know if anyone's good at it. I think it's mainly luck, and a lot of casinos have their own hand in it, but to her, it was the unhealthy coping mechanism that worked to get her through. And who was I to say anything against that, as I was using my own unhealthy coping mechanisms. I told myself that I had to stay for my son, that divorce wasn't an option. Very early on, that's something that I was taught, whether it was toxic masculinity or just a life lesson. I'm not quite sure, but I was told that divorce is not an option. If I tried to talk my feelings out with a therapist, I'd be considered weak. I was a man. I don't go to therapy. Even bringing up the idea of going to therapy was admitting defeat in the eyes of the people around me. If I tried to talk things out with another person, I was accused of cheating and being a weak man, because a real man wouldn't need to talk to anyone beside his wife. Very quickly, I was being reinforced with ideas that reaching out to talk to other people about this was not going to be an option. If I did any of that, I was going to be ostracized, made fun of. And so I was stuck in this weird predicament where I couldn't talk to anyone else about it, and I couldn't talk to my ex-wife. So what was I to do? I continued to learn how to be on mute. I continued to be silent and sat with my thoughts. This went on for years, where I sat in my head and got so upset because I thought I was failing. And this was being just reinforced by her that, yeah, you are failing. Do you see what's going on? You're in these positions where you are not succeeding. You're not making me happy. And now we're just proving all the things that you've thought negatively about yourself. I knew that the episode talking about my ex-wife was not going to be one episode. There is a lot for me to unpack, even trying to give a vague timeline of this. So I think this is as good of a spot to stop part 1 of talking about my ex-wife and the narcissism and that reiteration of failure. I have a lot more to talk about, and so I look at the time on here. I don't know where it's gone already, that we've been talking for almost 25 minutes here. I am so excited to continue to share the story with you guys, and I just want to take a minute to say thank you for listening. I'm already excited to get you the next part of the story, to get you the next episode. And I just want to say, until next time, this is Mikey going back on mute. Stay tuned.